There is one chapter in the Qur'an that does something no other chapter does. Every chapter begins with Bismillah, ir-Rahman, ir-Raheem. In the name of God, the Most Merciful, the Most Compassionate. Except one, no mercy opening, no Bismillah. And here's the part most people don't realize. This wasn't a mistake. It was intentional. That chapter is Surah At-Tawbah. And once you understand why, you'll never hear this surah the same way again. So why does Surah At-Tawbah begin differently from every other chapter? The word Tawbah is deeply meaningful. It speaks about returning to God, correcting a mistake, and owning the responsibility for one's choices. This surah was revealed during a very specific and serious moment in history. So what was happening at that time? And what does this chapter teach us about how the Qur'an balances mercy, justice, and accountability? By the end of this video, you'll understand why this surah sounds different, why it speaks firmly, and what that firmness actually teaches us about mercy, justice, and accountability. Have you ever felt uncomfortable while reading Surah At-Tawbah? You're not alone. It's the only chapter that does not begin with "in the name of God, the Most Merciful." And for many people, that absence alone creates fear. Surah At-Tawbah feels heavy in its tone. It speaks firmly because it addresses betrayal. It talks about promises that were made and then broken. It separates those who stayed honest from those who used peace as a mask. This surah speaks to responsibility after warnings were already given, not to people who didn't know better, but to people who did. It exposes hypocrisy when words say one thing and actions say another. And it reminds us that accountability matters when trust is abused. This surah is not about forcing belief. It's about facing consequences after mercy has already been offered. When this surah is read without context, it leads to two extreme reactions. Some people take this surah and use it to justify fighting and violence. They focus only on its strongest verses and treat them as permanent rules without considering when they were revealed or why. In this view, the surah becomes a justification for war rather than a response to broken promises in specific historical events. Others react in the opposite way. They read the surah, feel disturbed by its tone, and begin to doubt the message of the Qur'an itself. For them, Surah At-Tawbah feels too harsh, so they distance themselves from it, and sometimes from Islam as a whole. Both reactions come from the same mistake: reading the surah on its own without understanding its context. Some people point to it and say, "This is the real Islam." Others avoid it completely, assuming it must be harsh or extreme. But both reactions usually come from not knowing the full story. To understand this surah, we need to look at when it was revealed. Surah At-Tawbah came near the end of the Prophet Muhammad's mission. By this time, Islam was no longer new. People had already heard the message. Treaties had been made. Promises had been given. And sadly, many of those promises were broken again and again. So this surah was not revealed at the beginning of Islam. And it was not meant as an invitation to faith. It was revealed during a moment of truth and accountability. Most scholars agree on this. Surah At-Tawbah is not about spreading religion by force. It is about drawing a clear line between honesty and betrayal, between those who honored agreements and those who used peace as a lie. Here's what most people miss. This chapter came after mercy, not before it. If Surah At-Tawbah feels heavy, that feeling is not accidental. But let's ask an uncomfortable question. Ask slowly. Does mercy always have to sound gentle? Many people think mercy means endless softness. Always forgiving, always overlooking, always giving another chance. But the Qur'an shows us something more realistic. What happens when kindness is taken advantage of? Surah At-Tawbah was revealed after mercy had already been shown. Peace agreements were made, time was given, warnings were clear, yet betrayal continued. At that point, Pretending everything was fine would have been dishonest. This surah teaches something difficult but necessary. Forgiveness without limits can become injustice, especially to those who stayed truthful. This is where many people misunderstand the chapter. They read it on its own, without remembering everything that came before it. But the Qur'an is a conversation, not a collection of isolated statements. Before Surah At-Tawbah, there were years of patience, years of restraint, years of choosing peace, even when it was painful. This chapter does not remove mercy, it protects it. It teaches that mercy needs honesty to survive, and accountability is not cruelty. Another important point is this: Surah At-Tawbah is not about forcing belief. It is about responsibility. It does not judge people for their faith. It addresses actions, repeated actions, that harm trust and peace. This message matters today because real life also requires boundaries. Agreements must mean something. Silence in the face of harm is not kindness. Surah At-Tawbah teaches us that justice and mercy are not opposites. Sometimes, justice is how mercy stays meaningful. And maybe that's why this chapter doesn't start with Bismillah. Not because mercy is missing, but because the situation called for honesty before comfort. Once we understand that, Surah At-Tawbah feels less harsh. It feels truthful. Now here's the part most people have never stopped to think about. And once you hear it, you can't unhear it. Before the Qur'an, divine punishment was not corrective. It was final. Entire civilizations were erased, not warned once, not corrected gently, but completely removed after repeated corruption. Cities disappeared, names vanished from history. No second chance. In the time of Abraham, the cities of Sodom and Gomorrah were destroyed. They were warned repeatedly, but corruption continued. When change never came, the cities were completely wiped out, not corrected, not rebuilt. In the era of Moses, powerful nations collapsed in a single moment. Pharaoh and his army vanished, and an entire system of oppression ended overnight. There was no recovery, no continuation of that power. Even in the time of Jesus, punishment could be immediate. In the story of Ananias and Sapphira, they lied deliberately while pretending to be sincere and were judged instantly. It was a reminder that accountability was real, not symbolic. So let's ask the question we usually avoid. Was God not merciful in the time of Abraham? Was there no compassion in the era of Moses? Was mercy absent during the time of Jesus? If that makes you uncomfortable, it should, because it forces us to confront something deeper. Mercy didn't suddenly appear with the Qur'an, but humanity reached a moment where destruction was no longer the lesson. The Qur'an marks a turning point in history, from erasing societies to holding individuals accountable, from ending civilizations to giving time to reflect, time to return, time to choose. This isn't weaker justice, it's heavier, because responsibility is harder than punishment. And when you see that shift, Surah At-Tawbah sounds different. It's not cruel, it's precise. It speaks to people who already knew better. And now comes the real question. Why did divine justice change with humanity? That's not a small topic, and it's not one video. So in the next episode, we'll go deeper, because this is where the story really begins. So, 3 major scholarly opinions on why Surah At-Tawbah does not begin with "in the name of God," the most merciful, the most compassionate. The first view says this surah was so closely connected to the one before it that the opening phrase was intentionally not placed between them. 2. Preserve continuity, not to remove mercy. The second view focuses on meaning. This chapter opens with a declaration of responsibility and separation after repeated betrayal. The absence of the Bismillah signals seriousness, not anger, but honesty. The third view is the simplest, and perhaps the most humbling. The opening phrase was never revealed for this surah, so it was never written. No symbolism added, No explanation forced. 3 perspectives, different lenses, one message. This surah was meant to be heard with awareness, not comfort alone. And maybe that's what makes it powerful. So here's the question I want to leave you with. Are we looking for reassurance? Or are we ready to face responsibility when it speaks back? Because sometimes what's missing is exactly what we need to notice most.